We've talked a lot about what you should do. Let's talk a little bit about what you shouldn't do. I've got some strategies and tips and techniques for you to think about. Make sure that you don't do these things when you either go into a meeting, have a phone call, send an email. These kinds of things can really tick a legislator off. So first of all, and this applies to staff people, don't walk in and say, "Oh man, but I thought I was going to meet with someone important." We talked about this in the staff section, and believe it or not, people do say that. So it's essential to not show or talk about any disappointment when you're meeting with a staff person. Now, another thing not to do is to say, "Hey, here's some reading material for you. It's our 300-page annual report." They like one-pagers. They like very short information, and if you can send it electronically, that's even better. They don't have any room in their offices. I used to, when I was a chief of staff, have one filing cabinet. There's just no space. So if you have a piece of paper you want to give them, then make sure it's 1 to 2 pages. If you give them a larger piece, I'm going to be honest, they'll probably pull out the executive summary and then file that separately with your contact information. You also don't want to say, "I assume you know all about Bill 1234 or policy XYZ. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of issues that one staff person might be handling. When I was working on the Hill, I handled transportation, energy, environment, small business, campaign finance, housing. I handled some other things. I don't remember what they were. They were very important. But the key is that I handled all of those issues at one time for one person. So I know about 5 minutes worth of anything on the planet, but beyond that, I'm not really going to be able to have a substantive conversation. But that's why I rely on people who are coming in from the district to tell me about the issues and to tell me about why they think it's important and how it matters to the people that we represent. Another thing not to do, don't go into the office and say, "Hey, I promise, I don't have an appointment, but I promise I'll take only a half hour of your time." If you don't have a meeting, you can do a stop by, and that's where you go in and you hand someone your card and see if you can take a few minutes to chat with the policy staff person. But don't do what we call a sit-in, which is you go into the office and demand to be seen. That's just not very effective, and all you're going to do is irritate the staff person and the legislator. Another thing not to do is to say to a legislator or a staff person, "How much of a campaign contribution did you get to vote for or against this bill?" I know I'm not going to convince you about money in the political process. I know we're all very skeptical. But legislators and staff people hate it when people try to tie campaign contributions to policy issues. And it will often make them not do what it is you're asking them to do. An example, another chief of staff friend of mine, again from the other side of the aisle, who had someone write in a letter or an email thanking them for a meeting, and at the bottom of the email they said, "Oh, and I just dropped the check off at the campaign office." Well, the minute that they did that, the staff person had to write back and say, "I'm sorry, we can't co-sponsor this bill for you because we can't have it be seen as connected to a campaign contribution." So whether you believe it or not, just don't raise campaign contributions in a legislative office. Now, another thing not to do is to go into the office and say, "Hey, what you're telling me can't be right. I read on Facebook or on the internet or heard on late night television something different." Those are very interesting news sources, but remember, they're not actually the most accurate resources. Your association probably has the better information, or just make sure that you've read up on what's actually going on your policy issue. I always like to say, if you're going to be outraged, make sure you know why you're outraged and that you should actually be outraged by it. And if you know that before you go into a legislator's office, they're really going to appreciate that you've done your homework. Another thing not to say, "What do you mean we have to stand in the hallway?" I've mentioned this before. If they ask you to stand in a hallway, if they ask you to walk while you have your meeting, if they want to go down to the cafeteria and get a cup of coffee, they're not saying that they don't like you. They're not saying that they don't respect your views. They're just saying that they either have to go to another meeting and want to make sure that they get in the time with you, or they don't have space in the office to talk. So just make sure that you're flexible in your meetings. If you show up a little bit early, feel comfortable kind of standing in the hall for a little bit before you walk into the office. You just need to recognize that the spaces are a lot smaller than you probably realize, and that the staff people are trying to accommodate you the best that they can. Another thing not to say is, oh, I'm not from your district. I've never even been there. Is it nice there? Now, if you're not from the district, that's okay, but you need to make a local district connection. Legislators and staff people are there to represent the people that have voted them into office, and even those who haven't voted them into office. It's a very, very specific group of people. And if you can't demonstrate a connection to that, even if you're there to represent others in that legislator's district, they're just not going to be able to really focus in on what you're saying. And in fact, many legislative offices actually won't schedule meetings with people who are outside the district. Another thing not to say, and this one should seem pretty obvious, but I pay your salary. I had people say that all the time. They would walk in and say, you need to do what I want because I pay your salary. So what I did, I took my salary and I divided it by the number of people in the district. So it came out to 10 cents per constituent. So when people said that to me in the office, I had a big bowl of dimes on my desk, and I'd take a dime and hand it to them and say, there, now we're even. That might have been a little inappropriate, but it definitely delivered the message that we represent tons and tons and tons of people, and we need to make sure that we're representing all of their interests. So even again, if you're feeling that way, please don't say things like that to the staff people. It doesn't leave a good impression, and it's impossible to build a good long-term relationship when you do that.